All right, welcome everyone. We will begin in just a moment. Thank you. And just a note, our court reporter Lillian Rivera is with us. So Gina, if you could unmute Lillian. Lillian, if you have any questions, just go ahead and let us know. Okay, so welcome everyone. Tim Salton-Fuss here, the RAB meeting facilitator. I'd like to welcome you to the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base, Michigan Restoration Advisory Board meeting, and I'll serve as facilitator for this meeting as well. A court reporter is on the line to capture a verbatim transcript of tonight's meeting, and this online meeting is also being recorded. Before I go through and review the agenda, I'd like to just turn to our co-chairs for welcoming remarks. So I'll turn first to Dr. Catherine Barley. Catherine.
Hi, welcome. I am Dr. Catherine Barley. I'd like to provide a brief intro on myself since I've talked to most of you, but not done one of these restoration board meetings before. So I became the BRAC Environmental Coordinator and Program Manager in February. Previously, I managed large environmental restoration program for active Midwest bases. I have a doctorate degree in chemistry, a master's in pharmacology, a bachelor's degree in biology. My first postdoc was with ATSDR, and my second postdoc was with EPA in SIA, so doing risk assessment. I am new to the program, but I'm not new to this type of work, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's turn to Mark Henry then for any welcoming remarks you may have. Mark? If we could go ahead and unmute Mark Henry, please.
Okay. Hello, this is Mark Henry with the co-chair of the Community Restoration Advisory Board. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. I hope we have some good discussion and get answers to a lot of our long-standing questions from the conceptual site model stuff that's being reported tonight.
Great, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Gina, if you could move us to slide 3, please. We do have a full agenda tonight. We'll begin with brief updates from our RAB members and discuss action item status. We'll then move into military munitions response program training, followed by an update on the remedial investigation and interim remedial actions. We'll spend a considerable amount of time reviewing the conceptual site model, and we've reserved time towards the end of the meeting to address RAD members' questions as well. All of that portion of the agenda will focus on discussions among the RAB members only. Thereafter, members of the public can provide 3-minute verbal comments to the RAB members as well. And we'll conclude by 8 o'clock Eastern.
I got it. Bye.
Okay, and I'm hearing some commentary there, so we'll continue on. Right. We do ask that you hold questions to the end of the presentation. RAB members, please let us know if you have a question just by raising your hand electronically using that button there. I'll call on you, and then we do also ask that you mute your microphones just to make sure that we don't have any background noise. Members of the public can share verbal comments during that public comment session towards the end of the meeting, and as a reminder, our court reporter will capture your comments word for word. Let's move to slide 4 now, if we could. I'll now review the ground rules for tonight's meeting. After I read these, I'm going to ask all the RAB members to indicate their agreement with these ground rules by raising their hand electronically. Let me just read these off and then we'll go from there. Number 1, respect one another and maintain an atmosphere of open dialogue and exchange of ideas. Number 2, use our time together efficiently, wisely, and respectfully. Number 3, speak clearly and succinctly, one person at a time. Avoid interrupting others. That's especially important when we're trying to capture a verbatim transcript. Number 4, listen and remain open to different points of view. Number 5, maintain a propensity for progress, prepare, discuss, document, and move forward. Number 6, share information early, openly, and honestly. Number 7, accurately and objectively relate to the others' discussions that occur at these Restoration Advisory Board meetings. So RAD members, do you agree to abide by those rules? If you could just raise your hand electronically if you do. And please just keep that hand raised there if you don't mind. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. So one of my jobs is to keep our focus on these ground rules and to really help ensure a positive, productive, and respectful meeting. So I appreciate your assistance in that. I wanted to now confirm that our RAD members are present and ensure we have a quorum. So Gina, I'm gonna be calling off the RAD members' names one by one. And if you could please take them off mute, y'all can say hello to the folks and I'll just document your presence here. Also be confirming that we have that quorum per our operating procedures. So do we have Mr. Bill Gaines with us?
I have to unmute.
All right, thank you, Bill. I appreciate your time here. Let's see, do we have Mark Henry with us? Still with us, I think.
I am here.
All right, thanks, Mark. And how about Mr. Arnie Lurich?
Okay.
Great, thank you, Arnie. I appreciate that. Do we have Joe Maxwell with us?
Joe is not going to be attending tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mark. Do we have Rex Vaughn with us? I believe I saw Rex's name on the list. Rex,
Yes, I'm here, present.
all right, thank you very much, Rex. So it sounds like you will be operating on behalf of Joe Maxwell as his alternate, if that works for you.
Yes, that'd be fine.
Great, thank you. All right, do we have Ryan Mertz? Let's see, I don't see Ryan Mertz on the list, so he may join later. Do we have Jerry Schmidt? Also not on the list, but he may join us after a bit. I saw Daniel Stock, I believe is Daniel with us.
Present. It takes a while to get unmuted, but I'm here.
Thanks for your patience, I appreciate that. And do we have David Wynn?
Yes, David's here.
Great, all right, thank you, David. And do we have Kathy Oosterbarth? Kathy, are you with us? Okay, Kathy, it's showing that you're self-muted, so if you could just check on that. Okay, great. Well, we have more than 51% of the community RAD members. Let me go down the list of our government RAD members. Dr. Catherine Varley, the Air Force representative, is present with us. Do we have Lisa Sutton with Assable Township? Okay, and if anyone else is representing Assable Township, please just raise your hand electronically. Okay, others may join after a bit. We have Denise Bryan with District Health Department 2.
Good evening, Denise Bryan is present.
All right, thank you, Denise. I appreciate that. And do we have Puneet Vij with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services?
I'm sorry, what was the name you just said, sir?
Puneet Vij, P-U-N-E-E-T is the first name. Yeah, and Puneet, I see you.
Yes, I am here.
Great, all right, thank you. Appreciate your perseverance there. All right, and do we have Beth Place with Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy?
Yeah, Beth Place is here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Beth. Do we have Tim Cummings with Oscoda Township? Okay, I see you raised your hand electronically there. Tim, are you able
Yes,
to?
I'm here.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And do we have Mike Munson with Oscoda Wurtsmith Airport Authority?
Yes, this is Mike Munson here.
Thank you, Mike. And do we have Jesse Stintbeck with USDA Forest Service? Okay, and if anyone else is representing the Forest Service, then please go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, well, likewise, we have more than 51% of the government RAB members. We have both co-chairs as well. And so we do have a quorum tonight per operating procedures section 3.10. So thank you for your patience with that and with this technology as well. A final comment before we begin, Dr. Barley submitted the final minutes of the January 2021 RAB meeting via email on 30 March. So let's go ahead and move to slide 6 if we could. And we're entering the stakeholder RAB member update portion of the agenda. This topic is for RAB members to provide brief updates, not full presentations, detailed presentations, but just quick updates that you might want to share. And if you have anything extended, then of course, in the public comment period, that information can be shared as well. So let's start with Dr. Barley's Air Force updates. Over to you, Dr. Barley.
All right, so we've got some really neat field work going on right now. At the beginning of April, our RI contractor went ahead and did a base-wide water level survey to support the RI conceptual site model, which we'll be hearing more about this afternoon. Additionally, SS57 on slide 7, please, if you could go one further. I got pictures. There you go. SS57, we did our sampling for BOCs out there, and we did sampling last week at FTO2 to create our baseline for our efforts out there. Right now, as we speak, FTO2, the underground storage tank and the pad are being demolished so that we can actually put the 2017 remedy in place. All right, and then we continue operation and maintenance efforts at all of our pump and treat systems. So all that work is ongoing and sampling is being done. That's all I got, Tim. On to the next.
Sorry, I was on mute myself. So let's continue down the list of the stakeholder updates. We'll go next to the community RAB members. We'll start with Mark Henry. So Mark Henry, any updates that you'd like to share?
Sure. We've done a few things since the last RAB meeting. We reviewed and discussed with the Air Force the list of action items that has been accumulating over the years, and agreed that certain ones should be closed out, and we refined some other ones. The community RAB has been working towards revamping the operating procedures a little bit, and we have been very slowly providing or language to a draft document that I'll be sharing with the Air Force so that perhaps if they agree, we can vote on this during the next RAB meeting. Of course, we reviewed the Clark's Marsh interim remedial action and commented, provided those by email to Dr. Varley. And we also received from the NOW group, the Need Our Water group, a general comment letter that expressed their disappointment that the Clark's Marsh IRA does not go far enough in protecting the marsh from the ongoing Wurtsmith perfluorochemical threats, or the marsh's perfluorochemical discharge to the Assable. They recommended additional interim remedial actions as soon as possible, and recommended community input and transparency on the front end of the process. They brought this to the community RAB for our consideration and if we wanted to be a signatory to that letter. So we took a vote within our membership and there was a majority, and so the community RAB sent an email to the NOW group expressing our concurrence with their letter. We said yes, along with about 12 other pages of supporters. So that's my update.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate that. Let's turn now to Dan Stock. Any update you have, Dan?
I've tried to unmute and I didn't have anything to say. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Dan. Let's see, we don't have Joe Maxwell with us, so let's turn to Rex Vaughn. Rex, any updates from your standpoint?
I have no additional comments other than what Mark has already presented. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, how about to Bill Gaines?
Mark spoke for what I needed to present. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much. And how about over to Kathy Worsterbarth? And Kathy, I see you're here. I see that you are self-muted. I've just sent you an audio pen to see if you can connect via phone. So we'll come back and capture any updates that you have as well, Kathy. In the meantime, let's move on. Ryan Mertz and Jerry Schmidt are not with us tonight, so we'll go to Arnie Lurich.
Yes, been working on the environmental sequencing way of doing things, and have made a comment just today actually on the action item, and I'm going to be very interested in the CSM tonight and the use of the sequencing methodology that the RAB will be reviewing after tonight's session. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Arnie. I appreciate that. We definitely do have a lot on the agenda tonight. Let's turn last among our community RAB members to David Nguyen. And David, did you have any comments to share? Okay, well, let's continue on then to our government RAB members and see if there are any brief stakeholder updates they would like to share. First to, let's see, to Beth Place with Michigan Eagle.
Hi, this is Beth Place with Eagle, and I do have a few updates. Eagle completed review, since the last RAB, Eagle completed review of the draft Clark's Marsh interim proposed plan and submitted our comments to Air Force prior to that being released for public comment. Currently, Eagle is reviewing the Minneton Lake draft proposed plan for that interim remedial action, and we are in our comment resolution phase with Air Force right now. We also reviewed some of the work that Dr. Varley mentioned previously. Some of that work was reviewed a while back, and it's an ongoing process, such as at SS 57. But we did review the removal of the vault at FTO2, as well as the addendum to the work plan to remove the concrete pad at FTO2. So I'm glad that field work is ongoing. Additionally, on February 19th, Eagle requested that Air Force sample PFAS in the engineered wetland treatment system at LF 3031, so in the influent and effluent there. And I know that a response to that is pending, and we have been discussing that with Air Force. On March 23rd of 2021, Eagle also asked for an additional interim remedial action between the FTO2 treatment system and the Mission Street treatment system to evaluate an additional interim remedial action at that location. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. And now to Mike Munson with Oscoda Wurtsmith Airport Authority.
There we go. I got myself unmuted. I gave a brief business summary last month. At this particular time, there are no updates to bring forward to the team.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Let's see. I think Lisa Sutton has not been able to join us from Assable. And let's turn to Puneet Vij with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for any stakeholder update you might have, Puneet.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, perfect. So I have a couple of updates. So I'll start with the resampling update. So we are planning another round of resampling next month. So we'll be reaching out to the residents via recruitment letters or phone calls. Regarding fish updates, we recently received mercury and PFAS results back for yellow perch collected from Minneton Lake in 2018 and 2019. Currently, yellow perch from Minneton Lake are covered under the statewide advisory of 4 servings per month due to mercury. But the new data suggests that the advisory be changed to 2 servings per month of yellow perch due to PFOS and mercury. Regarding deer report updates, based on the data and the relationship between detections of PFOS in liver samples and the collection location distance from Clark's Marsh, MDHHS recommends that the do not eat advisory be changed from within 5 miles of Clark's Marsh to within 3 miles of Clark's Marsh. And finally, regarding MDHHS exposure assessment, we have our next meeting planned for May 4th. And we are in a process of forming a community advisory team at this point. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Puneet. Appreciate that. And we'll turn next to Tim Cummings with Oscoda Township.
Hi, this is Tim Cummings. I just wanted to echo the earlier statement that Mark Henry had presented, and that is just that we would like to, as a township, see the Air Force pursue a more thorough and comprehensive solution, remediation at this time. And in the sense of time here, I just want to leave it as a simple statement, and I know that there's going to be a number of people who have already spoken on that topic, and that there are more when Kathy Wisterbarth joins and is able to join the make comments. But for the time being, that is essentially what I think the township and a number of organizations and representatives are looking for. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Mr. Cummings. And I see that Kathy has gotten back in now. So Kathy, will come to you in just a moment, but let me first go to Denise Bryan with Department of Health District 2.
Good evening. My updates are that I'm here to listen to the dialogue and the planning, and I would like to applaud the now community members who work diligently every day to seek social justice for people affected by the contamination, and also recognizing the need for environmental justice in the Great Lakes state of Michigan here around the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. I am appreciative of listening to the Air Force's plan, and I hope they're ready to act with a sense of urgency. It was 2013 when I issued the first health advisory, and here we are still waiting for comprehensive remediation. And I would like to make it clear, with 26 years in public health, I feel this is a public health threat and a crisis that is global. My focus and energy will be in the jurisdiction I am responsible for. And I appreciate all my state partners and liaisons who, you know, are involved at many different levels, and hope to continue to work in a transparent manner with our residents. And if there's any legislators on tonight, I appreciate their advocacy, and I hope that we continue to have national policy. And I would like to say that I've been proud to work with Tony now on Michigan's legislation to create the 7 standards in Michigan. And those are minimum regulations that I hope the Air Force will recognize as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you in the community.
Thank you very much, Denise. I appreciate that. And Kathy has been persistent, so we'll turn back to Kathy Wusterbarth for any stakeholder updates you may have. Kathy.
Oh, hi, Tim and everybody. I'm sorry. I was having some, I guess, audio difficulties there, but I have heard the entire portion of the meeting. So my comments are really, I just want to address the transparency concerns that continue to occur. First of all, just to explain to the public the process of being informed about the Clark's Marsh plan. On March 16th, the media received a press release, apparently, and the community members were contacted for comments, and unfortunately we were unable to give comments because we were unaware that there was a plan that had been submitted. But we were informed on March 17th that a press release was given to us. Again, the plan was not attached, so we did have to go to that administrative record to go look for that plan. And so in the future, we're hoping that we can get those plans and you know, be informed of any plans like the Minneton plan that will be happening in advance. The Air Force did host a webinar on March 24th to educate the public about the process of the comments and the plan itself. We do want to note that we were kept in the dark during the entire process of preparing the draft plan, and we're only, you know, given the opportunity to comment after the plan was drafted. The Now Group did hold a webinar on March 31st to further educate the public on the details of the plan and how they could contribute to it. And we proceeded to have dozens of meetings to develop intelligent, well thought out comments on the plan. And this was hundreds of hours of work for community members and partners. The RAB met and voted to support the public comments, along with more than 200 other businesses, organizations, and individuals. Due to the extent of coordinating public engagement and supports, we were unable to make the U.S. Air Force imposed deadline of an April 14th RAB meeting submission, despite the comment period ending on April 17th. The community RAB members agreed the comments from the public would be summarized and read during the RAB member briefings. Subsequently, we requested the U.S. Air Force allow the inclusion of the slides that were developed by the community and a read of the letter in the meeting to ensure that all parties were aware of the community input for the plan. I was informed that the slides would not be allowed for inclusion in the meeting. Therefore, I am requesting anyone wanting those slides for this discussion tonight, find them on the Now Facebook page or email us at nowactiongroup@gmail.com and we will send them to you immediately. Unfortunately, I was told that I might suffer repercussions if I attempt to read the community public comments during the meeting. Therefore, I request the public do so during public comments. And I do have a couple of questions that
This is Catherine.
to be addressed.
Can you please add this at the end during the public comment period? That's what we asked. Not that you do it during your updates. These are supposed to be the updates. What you're doing based on your RAB position.
That's
Your
yes,
now stance
that
can be at the
is
very
work
end.
that I have been doing as a RAB member. So
And
I do have some questions I'd like to just forward to you that should be addressed during the meeting.
I'm just asking respectfully.
Let me jump in if I could. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so as a reminder, and as you suggested, Kathy, there is an opportunity at the end of the meeting for public comments. So as you were suggesting, for folks to make whatever comment they'd like to provide, to read off whatever statement they'd like to provide, and of course the RAB members can do that as well. Let me move us forward, unless there are other updates that you'd like to share, Kathy. Anything else that you'd like to share before we move on to the RAB business portion of the agenda?
I did have questions for Dr. Varley, just to explain what your plans are for future engagement for the Van Etten Lake plume, so that there aren't these transparency issues. And then also explain again to the public, there was some RAB conversations about the limitations of what you thought the now or the community submissions for the slides, the drawbacks or the limitations of those, if you could address those tonight. Thanks.
So I have to put all slides through Air Force coordination to get approval. I asked for all slides, all input to be provided by the 14th. I have the emails. If you'd like me to send those out to everyone, I can. I can resend them. I also add to every email. I add on to that chain so it continues to build. So you can go back through the emails I sent today or yesterday and find that one from the 9th of April asking for all submittals by the 14th. And I apologize for being new. I added a lot of technical detail. So that technical detail takes a lot longer to clear. We're also providing a lot of the CSM tonight. You can ask your questions and have them answered with all available data. Additionally, we're giving you a chance to ask. It's being recorded. The tools that we use and how we make our informed decisions are all being shared. I am trying to be transparent.
Okay.
I'm doing my best.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate that exchange. What I wanted to do is move us on forward. We do have a packed agenda here. The next item on our agenda is RAB business. That's slide 10 there as indicated, and you can move to the next slide as well. So we're now in that RAB business portion, and just a brief note to say that Dr. Varley and Mark Henry, the two co-chairs, have discussed the action items as a standard practice after each RAB meeting. They get together and review the action items, and Mark referred to that process as well. Also, Dr. Varley's issued a number of emails with updates to specific action items. So there will be a follow-up discussion among the co-chairs to talk through the details of each of these. I just wanted to see with the co-chairs if there's anything you'd like to add. Catherine, anything you'd like to share on the action item list?
I am slowly making my list through the action items, and hopefully I'm addressing everybody's prior to my becoming the BEC. So if I missed the ball on something, please let me know. I think Arnie's already pointing out ones that I've missed, so we'll get there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Varley. And Mark, anything you'd like to share about the action item review process or other RAB business?
I'm looking forward to going over the new action items that were added to the action item tracker as a result of the last RAB meeting. We didn't have an opportunity to go through those when we went through things before. And so after this meeting, I look forward to it. We'll set a date and get her done.
Great. All right, that's always a good approach. So let's move into our next topic, if we could. It's the Military Munitions Response Program Awareness Training, and Kevin Nicholas with Bay West will be presenting. We have 10 minutes for this update, so I'll turn over to Kevin Nicholas.
Thank you very much. This is Kevin Nicholas, and today we're doing the Munitions Response Program, and would like to touch base on the 3 R's explosive safety. Next slide, please. What are munitions? Munitions include artillery, mortar shells, rounds, bombs, small arms ammunition, grenades. As you can see, they come in many shapes and sizes, and you can find them in any uniform fashion, rusted, new, used. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. What are Uxo? Uxo is unexploded ordnance. Munitions, ammo that failed to function properly, can be of any type, may just be a component of munitions, fuse, explosive filler. As you can see, you have a bomb there on the bottom there, and it's rusted, kind of mangled, hard to tell what it was. Next slide. Some munitions are hard to identify. Explosives can be encountered anywhere on the installation from previous military training. As you can see, it's hard to tell. It could look like an old car part. So a good rule of thumb is if you didn't drop it, don't pick it up. Next slide. Munitions vary in appearance. Munitions are dangerous regardless of appearance. Munitions type, shape, size, age, or condition does not matter. Flares, simulators, and blasting caps are all dangerous. War souvenirs can be dangerous also. Next slide. We have a picture of artillery projectiles. You have a 105, a new condition, unfired, and a 105 that has been fired in the used condition. As you can see, it's definitely different. You have some rusted. It's hard to tell that it's actually military munition. And we have a pin for a reference size. Next slide. Then we have a new unfired rocket and a used fired rocket. And see, once again, you can tell that it's rusted. The color coding's gone. It's hard to tell that it's actually military munition. Next slide. Recent munition accidents. A lot of people like to go out and find munitions, scrap it, and this is a very bad idea. You have potential explosive hazards within the scrap, and you can die, get hurt, mangled, hurt your family. You definitely don't want to go out in range and find souvenirs. Next slide. Example of warning signs. Trespassing on areas with warning signs and gates may result in injury or death, is hazardous and prohibited by law, may result in substantial fines. You can see that they're example of signs, stop signs, danger, military firing range, and exploding ordnance, do not enter. If you see these, do not enter. Next slide. What do you do if you encounter munitions? We have the 3 R's. First one is recognize that munitions are dangerous. Munitions may not look like a bomb or a bullet. They may look harmless, but they are dangerous. They can be shiny or rusty. They may be clean or dirty. Regardless of whether a munition has been removed, it may still explode. In fact, most munitions can be more dangerous once they've been fired. Next slide. The second step is retreat. Do not approach, touch, move, or disturb. Carefully leave the area the same way you entered. In remote surroundings, mark a general area where you encounter the munitions so local authorities can locate. Do not go closer to the munitions when marking. And the last step is report. Report what you saw and where you saw it. You want to call 911. The authorities will clear an area and contact Explosive Ordnance Disposal, EOD, personnel to dispose of it. Next slide. And we have resources, dinex.com. It's the DoD Environmental Safety and Occupational Health Network and Information Exchange is a collaborative cloud platform used to share and report DoD specific environmental safety and occupational health information with the public and DoD communities. They have the 3 R's explosive safety education program on there. And they have many resources that are good. I recommend checking it out. You can find presentation, videos, photos, handouts, and numerous other resources. And next slide. And thank you.
Great. Well, Kevin, as a former Marine artillery officer, that reminds me of a different life I used to have. Thank you for that update. Can you tell us a little bit about just the purpose behind the training and why it's important to provide that training regularly?
Oh, yes, definitely. The purpose is just so if you're out there and you're conducting your business and you find something, so, you know how to proceed. You definitely want to pick it up. And it's good just a refresher, you know, anybody that's going to be out on site, that you give this refresher course to them. And so they're aware and they know how to respond. Just the biggest one is do not pick anything up. If you didn't drop it, don't pick it up.
Great.
Thank you.
Something even a Marine can understand. Thank you. I appreciate that. We have a couple of minutes for any questions about this munitions topic. If you do have questions about the munitions topic, please go ahead and raise your hand. Let's see. And it looks like Kathy has a question. Go ahead, Kathy.
Nope, that must be an old hand. My hand must have been raised this entire time, so disregard.
I appreciate it. Okay, well, great. Let's see. I see Mark Henry's hand up, so go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to bring this home a little bit. There have been some munitions found at Wurtsmith historically. And in fact, one of the retaining banks at Ratliff Park along Van Etten Lake is built underneath the soil of old practice bombs. So practice bombs are around the Wurtsmith area. And if you go up around 7 Mile Hill, that was used as a practice bombing and strafing area during World War II. And you can probably run into live munitions up there. So just be aware they are around.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. All right, Kevin, anything else that you have for us?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I see Arnie had a question, hand up for a question. Arnie?
Just to add to Mark, actually that bombing range is identified, a lot of it, by the U.S. Forest Service, who operates the Pine River and Kirtland's Warbler area. And so the signs are up there not to go off the roads. So it is a serious problem, as your speakers have talked about. That's great that you're giving this training.
All right. Well, thank you, Arnie. And thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and move on, if we could, to the remedial investigation and interim remedial action update. We're a bit ahead of schedule, so maybe we'll do this one before we take a break. So slide 26, I believe, and we'll turn to Paula Bond with Aerostar for this update. Paula?
Good evening, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to give a quick update on the schedule for the remedial investigation and the interim remedial actions. Next slide, please. So the first slide we have up here is just a diagram of the RI process, the circular process, and then the IRA circular process. We showed these in the last RAB, but I think it's important just to kind of remind everybody in what phase of the CERCLA process that we currently are with both the RI and the IRA. So under the RI, we are currently in the UFP-QAP documentation process. And under the IRA CERCLA process for the Clarks Marsh and Minneton, as you guys mentioned earlier, we have just finished the Clarks Marsh proposed plan comment period, and we're working on moving forward to the record of decision for that. And then we are in the process of working on the Minneton Lake proposed plan, and I think Beth with Eagle mentioned earlier that they have reviewed that document and we're currently in the comment resolution phase. So again, that just kind of shows you where we are in the overall process for the RI and the IRAs. Next slide, please. So the RI work plan UFP-QAP, that was submitted to Eagle for review on April the 6th. So we're waiting for those comments to come back, and then we'll move into the comment resolution phase. While we're doing that, we are beginning our preparation for field activities, looking at potential sampling locations and vetting things like that in the field, getting our procurement ready, ordering our supplies and materials. Next slide, please. On the IRAs, like I just mentioned, the proposed plans and records of decision, the Minneton Lake proposed plan will be coming very soon. And the public comment period is yet to be determined. That will be based on comment resolution and coordinating with Eagle on that. And there will be a virtual public meeting for the Minneton Lake proposed plan, similar to what we did for Clarks Marsh. The date on that is also to be determined, pending that document being issued. And then we'll move forward with the record decision for Clarks Marsh after reviewing all of the public comments and considering all the information that has been provided during the public comment period that closed on Saturday. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that just kind of gives everybody an idea of the field schedule for both the RI and the IRA. As you can see in the left, we're still in the documentation phase for both of those activities, finishing up the UFP-QAP and then the documentation, the proposed plans and rods for the IRAs before we get to the field. So right now we are looking at beginning the RI field work in July, and we're looking at beginning the IRAs for Clarks Marsh in early August and Minneton Lake later in August, if everything stays on schedule with the documentation and the review cycles with Eagle, public comment periods and information provided. This is just our outlook at the schedule currently. We do plan to have the RI fieldwork completed in late December of this year. And then we also plan to have both IRAs up and running in February of 2022. So that's just a brief look at where we are with the schedule right now. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions anyone has on the schedule. I know everyone is itching to get to the conceptual site model discussion.
Great, thank you, Paula. Any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand electronically and we'll go one by one. All right, any questions at all for Paula on this update?
Yes, I had my hand raised. I would like to get some idea of the amount of work.
I'm sorry, who's the speaker? I need the speaker.
December.
Yeah, go ahead and say your name again for the court reporter, please.
Bill Gaines.
Yep. And Bill, if you don't mind, go ahead and repeat your question if you would.
I would wonder if you would have some kind of comment on the scope of the field work that's going to be done between now and December. It seems that there's a lot of work to be done in comparison to what we did in the ESI and a shorter period of time to complete that work.
Right, sure. Yeah, we do have a lot of field work scheduled. We will be sampling soil, we'll be sampling groundwater, surface water, sediment. We're going to be installing monitoring wells out there in multiple locations. So we do have a lot of field work scheduled for this summer. So and fall, there will be a lot of activity out there. So a lot going on, and that's just for the RI. And of course, once the IRAs get started, there will be construction work going on in a couple of different places for those IRAs, installing the extraction wells, as well as expanding the existing buildings at the fire training area and the central treatment system. So there will be a lot of activity out there this summer and fall.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Bill. I see two other questions, one from Arnie LaRich and another from Rex Vaughn. So again, asking for RAB members for questions. So Arnie, go ahead.
Okay. Paula, this is Arnie LaRich. I appreciate the process that the Air Force and the Eagle have negotiations and review of comments and everything, and fully support that cannot be made totally public. However, some of these highly technical things, topics that are brought up by either Eagle or the Air Force or other agencies, it's difficult for the public and the RAB to anticipate what significant issues are being discussed by those agencies. We don't have to have the details, but as we prepare and try to train ourselves on how to review the circular process and this particular site, it would be helpful if you could just let us know the topics that are being discussed, or based on the comments sent to you and so forth, so that at least we'll know how to prepare, so that when you do give us the documents as a public review, we'll be able to start with a little bit more capability. One perfect example is the state's request for the RRD's request for that additional interim remedial action. We did not, at least I did not know about that for a couple of weeks, almost to the end of the public comment period, when it showed up on their website. So if we had known within a few days or a week after they had submitted that to you, just as a topic, we could have been looking at that area, and our public comments could have included our opinion about that. And I think that would have been helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, let me jump in and see if Paula or others have a response. Also, just a note, we are getting a lot of background noise. But Paula, did you have any initial responses to the point Arnie brings up?
Yeah, I think I heard most of your comment, Arnie. I'm sorry, there was a little bit of breaking up there. But I think it was related to technical information that we are discussing with Eagle in our scoping meetings and preparing our documents. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I know that the meeting minutes from our scoping meetings Eagle posts to the MPART website. So that is one place where I think you can get some more technical information for what the team is working on.
But also the follow-up questions that on particular topics that Eagle may send to the Air Force.
Well, I know you mentioned the letter that Eagle sent, and I'll let Dr. Varley respond to that on the correspondence between Eagle and the Air Force.
Yeah, Arnie, all of that, this is Catherine Varley. All of that is still in Air Force review. So I am new to this project. I am looking at the data. I am technical, and I am depending on the environmental directorate as well to help me out with those reviews, as well as our support contractors. So until we actually have a path forward, it's hard to share because we don't, we're pulling data and we're looking at it, right? So once we have a path forward, then, it becomes available to share. But Eagle and Air Force discussions are part of the deliverable. They're a process of working through to get to the next stage, right? So that we can share what we're doing.
Great. Okay, well, Arnie, thank you for your question. I appreciate that. I see we have one other RAB member who had a question, Rex Vaughn. So go ahead, Rex.
This is a question for Paula. By the way, this is Rex Vaughn speaking. Paula, based upon the size, volume, quantity, and technical detail that you undoubtedly will see from the public comments on Clark's Marsh, do you anticipate that this information and these the communication from the public will impact your project schedule? What I'm looking for is if you need to make some changes, have you built that into your timelines and all of your project scheduling documents versus just going ahead on what you already had? So I'm looking for your opinion on whether or not you're going to be faced with some redesign issues. Thank you.
Yeah, well, yes. So the simple answer is yes. And we have considered that in our schedule. And we are looking at all of the comments that were received from the public. We are looking at them to determine if there are things that we can do, if they're applicable to make changes. So we are looking at that, yes, and we have included that in our project schedule. And as we move through this process, and I think I say this every time because it's true every time, every document we submit or every step that we take, there are always things that may slow us down or speed us up in some cases. So we update the schedule monthly based on things that have happened during that month. So we stay on top of that, and that's kind of the schedule that I presented today is where we are based on what we know right now. So, but we do incorporate float in the schedule for public comments, for changes that we may need to make, or comments from the regulator as well.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, if you would, please. If the public comments result in a change in the scope of work, is that subject to re-review through the public comment process?
It is not. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Barley.
Not necessarily, but it could result in a contract mod, which would cause more delays, right?
Okay, but public comment is not included for a redesign based on public comment. Is that correct?
The public comment will be addressed in the ROD. Eagle will be reviewing the ROD and making sure that everything is appropriately addressed.
All right, let me try to clarify my question. What I'm asking is, if you have to make a change based on public comment, does the process require you to go back to another public review and comment period?
No.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all. I appreciate that. On our agenda, we had a 10-minute break. And so let me suggest that we go ahead and take that break now. 5:58 now. We'll come back at 6:08 and we'll continue with the conceptual site model. So we're on break for 10 minutes. Thanks.
I will be right back.
And just a comment that we will start up in 2 minutes, 2 minutes until the end of our break. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. It's now 6:08, so we'll go ahead and start back up again. Gina, you can advance to the next slide. We're at one of our longer agenda items, conceptual site model. And just as a reminder, it can be difficult to pose questions during the middle of online presentations. So please hold those until Colin asks for questions. And then just raise your hand electronically and I'll go down the list and everybody can get all the RAB members at least can get their questions in. And this is the portion of the agenda focused on the RAB members themselves. Other attendees will have an opportunity to provide public comments after next couple of agenda topics that we have. So Colin Plank will be providing us this update. Over to you, Colin.
Over to me.
Okay, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I think I was artificially muted there or something. All right, so I will share my screen here. Have I shared the right screen? Let's see. Sharing. All right, so show screen. I'm going to show. You should be seeing a painting. And all right. Let's see, audience view. Okay. So, okay, does everybody see the presentation slide?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. All right. So, thanks for the attention, and I'm glad there's a lot of interest in the conceptual site model. It's something we've been working very hard on as part of the RI process in preparation of the UFP QAP. There's the requirements for a conceptual site model or a preliminary conceptual site model, and that formed the nucleus of what I'm going to show you today. And we've since been expanding on that as project needs have evolved, and as we've been able to add to sort of that initial surge in CSM production associated with the initial work planning. And that's a key point, is that a conceptual site model is a dynamic sort of living thing. And it's not a numerical model, just some basic, background here. Conceptual site models mean different things to different people. This is not a ecological and human health risk assessment type conceptual site model. Those typically look like flow charts showing completed pathways. This is a geologic and hydrogeologic conceptual site model that helps understand or communicate what we know about contaminant fate and transport and the bigger sort of groundwater picture. And so these types of conceptual site models, while they're dynamic, are often communicated to groups or included in reports as sort of static elements, consisting of maps, stratigraphic summaries, or hydrostratigraphic columns showing, the major water moving zones, and then cross sections. And that's the bulk of what we're going to show today. But one of the things we're doing associated with complex sites like Wurtsmith is we're moving towards sharing these and making these materials more dynamic by incorporating them into web applications that allow for easier sharing between team members. And so I'm going to be presenting some of the material today via this thing we're calling the digital site management tool. And I just want to kind of share that with you a second, so when this pops up later, you know where this is coming from. And then also, this will give me a chance to just sort of give an overview of some of the CSM contents. So we have in here a live map. We can zoom in to areas of interest. Later on, when we're discussing, we can measure off areas and annotate the map if someone wants to capture ideas. We can display on here a range of data sets. What I'm showing right now is the current point data set that consists of, well, it has to refresh, especially when I'm sharing over the web, over a presentation. This is the point data set of subsurface data locations, both groundwater, vertical aquifer samples, lithologic borings, and surface water samples. This is the current status of the combination of AFCEC's ERPM's database and data that's been made available to us from Eagle. So this is the data set we're working with. So we can share that and make it clear, where we do and don't have data. You've probably seen members of the public and other REB. You guys have probably seen so many potentiometric maps in some form or another. You're pretty familiar with them, but we can bring up in here different generations of potentiometric maps. We have queued up 2 for this meeting, and this is the potentiometric surface, or the groundwater elevation map from the UFP QAP CSM, the preliminary CSM. And this was created using November 2019 data, and then Eagle October 2018 data for off base locations in the stars there. So this is kind of a bit of a combination of data sets. And this gave us an initial sort of understanding of, some of the commonly observed groundwater and sort of system trends here at Wurtsmith. And that's this, groundwater mound. So there's flow off to the northeast towards Van Etten, flow off to the southeast towards Assable. There's a groundwater divide. We're familiar with the gaining nature of Van Etten Creek and the Assable. We also are showing, a groundwater divide that runs parallel to sort of Huron beach ridges. And because this is a mishmash, what we really prefer is a synoptic groundwater snapshot. So this is the newest groundwater elevation survey that we've comprised from the 2020 November synoptic round. So this is really more of a one snapshot in time holistic view. So we'll bring this map up as well. And, and this is showing some of those same features. We can also bring in here, and we'll use to drive the discussion, we have our current understanding of plume morphology, so it can be queued up. And so this kind of illustrates our current understanding of source areas and plume trajectory relative to the potentiometric surface. And so when you're looking at a potentiometric surface, you want to be thinking about groundwater moving at right angles to those lines, flowing straight downhill. And in general, plume trajectories should, mimic that. And in sandier, coarser grained material, these plumes should start to form some sort of longer linear shapes. And so in areas where you have little dog legs and things like that, these might be indicative of heterogeneities at depth. And so to address that, this is where the kind of traditional network of cross sections comes in, and we'll be able to share these with you via this tool, by pulling them up on the fly. I have a lot of these queued up so we don't have pauses, but we can pull these up, look at where these are oriented relative to the potentiometric map. So, so this is kind of an overview of the contents of the CSM, and we're doing this. The point of this effort up front isn't, a research program for the sake of a research program. This is to compile a large legacy data set, put new data into the context of that new legacy data set, and really make better informed decisions with respect to investigation and remediation strategies, which ultimately should, improve efficiency. So with that, I'm going to put this back over here. We'll come back to that. I'm going to talk to more of the traditional slides here for a minute more. And I'll pause for questions at certain points, but there is a lot of material to get through, and my plan is to go over the contents of the CSM, get through the major components of the story, and then open it up to questions and revisit those areas with other data and looking at the digital site management tool. But if you guys start getting impatient and you just gotta have a question answered, then I'll leave that up to the moderator to be the judge. Okay, so again, overview of the CSM elements in the presentation. We're going to talk a lot about the geology early on because this is the plumbing that controls groundwater flow paths. So you've seen some discussion of the geology before. Just to reiterate, the importance of it is that it is the plumbing of the house. The hydrogeology of the site will address, again, using things like those potentiometric maps, but then also on our cross sections, we're showing lines of equipotential, which will stretch your ability to think three-dimensionally a little bit, but they show the component of flow within the plane of the cross section and help facilitate, discussion as to fate and transport. And yeah, in each of these, or throughout the discussion of the CSM, I think you'll see our current synthesis on eastern and southern boundaries of the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base, the relationships of groundwater and stratigraphy and contaminant to Van Etten Lake Creek and Clark's Marsh. Take a little sip here. So I don't remember who it was at the start of the call, but they had an interest in sequence stratigraphy. And just by way of familiarizing some of you with that, this is a EPA paper that you can look up, or I can provide a link to. But this is a EPA groundwater issue paper that summarizes this approach, and this was co-authored by 2 of my colleagues and I, along with Herb Levine and Kenneth Eman. So Mike Schultz, Rick Kramer, myself put this together primarily. And this outlines this methodology. I'll go over some of that. But if you want to read up more on that, that is available for free. The big message, though, is that, you know, while sequence stratigraphy, classic sequence stratigraphy has, you know, sort of its grounding in marine systems and an approach to oil exploration and finding reservoir rock, the concept concept that we promote is that the stratigraphy that sets up the aquifers and aquatards of a site are, you know, analogous to the target, you know, reservoir per se in an oil industry. And so this approach is equally applicable to environmental sites. And the key element is that your site stratigraphy, the way you correlate your cross sections, the lithologies present at your site, should be the product of a coherent series of geologic events. Otherwise, with that context missing, you're prone to just connecting sands to sands because they seem to be at the same elevation, clays to clays because, well, they're clays, and so you end up with these crazy, you know, shapes and things like that. The point is to do some background research, establish a series of geologic events that are known that generated the site stratigraphy, and then make sure that your sections work together coherently in a geologically plausible and defensible sort of realm. So that's a little bit of what this slide is about. I'm going to actually back up one. You know, looking at Wurtsmith, I always start at looking at sites with the topography. You can see right off the bat, this is from a figure that's been passed around a few times at some of these events. You can see these arcuate, you know, bodies, and these are relic high stand deltas left over from paleo levels of Lake Huron and in the stages immediately following glaciation. We'll talk about that here a little bit more. So these are large deltaic bodies. So if you're ever riding your bike along this area and you're noticing a steep hill and then a flat and a steep hill and a flat and a step-like nature, it's because these lakes were progressively dipping down lower, and this delta produced by the Paleo Assable kept pushing its way out into the basin. So also key in here is that these deltas are adjacent to thinly veiled or exposed at the surface tills. So this speaks to the basal aquitard in the area. These deltas built out onto newly exposed basal tills, so they're not far from the surface in some areas. And then the beach ridges and shoreline deposits associated with the dynamics of Lake Huron through time help build up a portion of the site stratigraphy as well. So we're going to talk more about this now. This is just sort of that overview. So Larson, 1987, among others, put together a chronology of lake stages for Huron associated with the deglaciation of the landscape. And there's also a PhD by Winnie Burgess from the University of Michigan that really nailed this early on in the 70s. And again, the Jack Pines Delta and the 7 Mile Hill Delta, these are the product of a glacial Lake Warren, or a later stage called Lake Lundy by Winnie. I think it has since changed names, but this is a high stand of Paleo Lake Huron that was present when the ice was still very much within the basin. The subsequent withdrawal of ice to about around 11,000 to 10,000 years ago resulted in Lake Algonquin, and that's shown in this map here. Wurtsmith is shown as a star at these shoreline locations here, so you kind of see where the site is. And this progression of lower lake levels and the dynamics of that is really driven in part by not only just the position of the ice, but the position of these outlets. As outlets were exposed through withdrawal of the ice, the lake would begin to drain through a new preferred outlet, and so it might start lowering as isostatic rebound lifted up an outlet. The lake might start rising until a new outlet was discovered, and so these lake levels are going up and down. So, but the important part of the story is that the Algonquin Delta that Wurtsmith is situated on here on the north limb is this broad arcuate shape here, and it's the last of these arcuate deltaic forms that are preserved. So it sits atop the tills that are present just west of the site and that are present under all these deltas. So during so Lake Algonquin, the shoreline of Lake Algonquin is probably somewhere bouncing back in here, but during that time the Paleo Assable is depositing sediment in a fan delta type form here on the shoreline, and that really results in the bulk of the permeable aquifer under Wurtsmith Air Force Base. The other key event is a catastrophic drainage of that lake, and that we'll see relates to very much to Assable's, the Assable River's position. This resulted in, during this low stand, which is a drop in lake level, multiple basins forming. The shoreline is now 200 feet lower than it was during the Algonquin high stand. And so the key point here is that the Assable River incisors down through the delta into the tills and finds its outlet further out in these basins. Subsequent rise of lake levels then resulted in Lake Nipissing and Algoma lake levels, which you can see in the modern topography very clearly as a series of elevated beach ridges, and also the sort of backfilling of that incised valley as the river responded to rising base level. Sedimentation would increase in the river valley, and that would fill, in addition to some sort of freshwater bay lagoonal sediments. So those events are what created the stratigraphy of the site, and I'm not going to dwell too much more on it here, but the important element of understanding stratigraphy is to have a depositional analog or some sense spatially of how grain size changes might work. And so we look to depositional models from analogous systems. In South America, where there are glacially fed fluvial systems infilling lakes, there are modern analogs being worked out as we speak. And this is a block diagram from a lacustrine braid plain delta facies model from a glacially fed river system infilling a lake. And so this is very much what I picture the Algonquin Delta to have looked like after incision of the 7 Mile Hill Delta. So you have a large arcuate body of sand and gravel. This is primarily the aquifer. You have these slopes preserved. You have down to the lake basin bedding preserved. You have a thin pro-delta clay over top the till. And then, it is very coarse, but you have potential for silty channel fills and preferential pathways where gravels have concentrated within these braided fluvial type channels. So it's not just a pile of sand at Wurtsmith. It's very permeable, and that groundwater mound speaks to, large saturated flow off this mound of sediment. But undoubtedly, when you get into the details, there are going to be preferential pathways that are related to, concentrations of gravels versus, thinner zones of silts and clays. The backfilling and the beach ridge formation is more analogous to a modern wave-dominated delta, and this is a model that's been presented in some other presentations. And so I think this is really more applicable to the Nipissing and Algoma and modern system. And so, equivalent with that also would be sort of the increasing maturation of the landscape and increasing amounts of organic matter and debris and soil formation and so on. And so a change in general content of the valley fill, and then also a more pronounced offshore silt and clay volume. And so this is a key feature when talking about deltaic deposition to think about, is this lateral facies change from shore face to offshore and these pinch outs. This, I think, comes into play in the eastern margin of the site. So this is a look at the hydrostratigraphic column that I was kind of showing in that previous slide, and just want to take a minute to talk about this. These colors will be present on all of the cross sections and in the cross section key, and this really outlines for you, sort of the major water moving bodies on the site and the major aquatards. And so just working up from the bottom, you have the Marshall sandstone, the sandstone aquifer at depth, not really an issue for us here due to a large, fairly thick 60 to 100-foot thick till, which is topped by thin pro-delta and lake bottom clays. And so we've got a pretty regionally robust aquatard that the aquifer system sits upon. Then you've got your Algonquin fan delta, which is the major water mover, and then the incision and backfilling of that incision with floodplain and bay lagoonal deposits of the Assable River. And so this is important because it functions as a bit of a hydraulic boundary on the southern margin of the site, or at least an impediment to flow. And then the clays out eastward of the site incorporate a certain amount of lower shore face and offshore sedimentation associated with these higher stands of lake level. So one more little bit about this, try to speed this up a little bit, but here is a look at the topography of the site. I'm just sort of starting, we're starting to zoom in now from that larger map. And so these are 1-foot contours, and you can see, the flat zone, of course, where the Air Force likes to put their runways. They always prefer that, right? So here's your portion of the delta, the northern limb of the Algonquin Delta. Here's the incision of the Assable, and then the other side of the incised Algonquin Delta. And these are the beach ridges I'm talking about, where you can see and if you were to continue further north, there are beach ridges within here as well. So these are the on-lap of younger beach ridge systems. So if we step through then the evolution of the site, here's the Algonquin Delta, makes up your major aquifer. Right? Then there was the event of the incision into the Algonquin Delta, which would subsequently be backfilled as lake levels rose and Nipissing beach ridges were deposited. A little bit uncertain about relic drainage that possibly could have formed off the front of the preserved Algonquin Delta. Maybe there's some interplay between an ancestral pine river and these beach ridges as they're coming on onshore, you know, as that thing kind of fights to maintain itself, or maybe it wasn't present yet. Maybe it was just present as, you know, it evolved from within one of these beach ridge and runnel systems later. And then, yeah, the Algama and modern high stands. And, and then Holocene floodplain deposits. You know, this is kind of like the system as it exists today, made up of these components. And what we're going to talk about now is, you know, how this geologic evolution of the site will impact, you know, the potential for off-site migration and groundwater flow. So I'm just going to keep going ahead unless anyone thinks they want to stop for questions on that material.
David, I'm sorry, Colin, I'd say that we do have a couple of hands raised, and so let me just suggest that we go ahead and press on, but David Nguyen, I will start off with you when we do get to questions and then go to Dora and Bogdan and others. But Colin, back to you.
Okay. So again, back to that initial map that I showed you in the DSMT. Just again to reiterate, flow, we're interpreting flow towards Van Etten Lake, flow offsite towards the Assable River from both sides, the groundwater divide that is present, stretching to the south and gaining groundwater in both Van Etten Creek and the Assable River. This is again a little closer look at that fall synoptic from last year and the data set that was used to create it. You know, some strong convergence of groundwater flow at Clark's Marsh, gaining conditions at the Assable River, and flow towards Van Etten. All right, so again, we've kind of shown you that cross-section of network. We're gonna start talking about those now. We have a network of 9 cross-sections prepared and the ability to generate more on the fly in some software. These cross-sections are hand-drawn, so our potentiometric maps. We're big advocates of you know, not automating that process, in that you're working with your again, as you'd be working with your knowledge of depositional systems, you're working with your knowledge of you know, typical groundwater dynamics. So let's get into the cross sections now and show you how we're using them to, you know, inform the approach to investigation and remedies. So when I start looking at the PDFs of the cross sections, we'll be able to come back to this key. But again, all those elements of the hydrostratigraphic column that I showed are color-coded to that hydrostratigraphic column. Just note that in each of these kind of pairings, so here we have modern Assable alluvium, the darker of the colors is supposed to indicate the lower permeability component. The lighter of the two colors is supposed to indicate the more permeable facies component. Little harder when you get down into here and we're talking about the Assable incised valley fill. They're both kind of light, but again, the pale green is permeable, the not as pale, the deeper green is impermeable. So kind of always, you know, I'll try to point that out as we're going along. We use in some locations some gamma log information, which is a downhole geophysical tool, legacy data collected by DEQ and Air Force over time. This is natural gamma log emissions. There's no radioactive source put down the well, but because clay minerals emit radiation naturally, you can use a gamma log as a proxy for grain size. And so it gives you kind of a continuous record as opposed to a lithologic log, which depends on intervals observed, maybe not even continuous coring. So these are nice to have. When we're implementing the sequence stratigraphic approach, you'll see sort of a different depiction of borings. Instead of just a strip log or a stick that shows the location of the lithology data, we try to depict the general characteristic of the lithology using these color boxes. So bigger the box, bigger the grain size. If there's an orange or red component to the box, there is some component or color to the box, there's some component of gravel. Very few just pure gravels, but if you see a big, a big red or a big orange box, that indicates higher permeability gravels. That doesn't indicate, a contaminant or something like that we're trying to flag. Those colors all correspond to lithology. Where the colors are plain yellow, that means a well-sorted, clean sand. Box gets bigger from from fine to medium to coarse sands. Where there's green, it means there's a silty component, and where there's blue, it means there's a clay component. When dealing with tills or with gravels, with clay with some gravel component, we sometimes try to flag that with kind of a brown color so we can maybe differentiate between a lacustrine clay and a till, but that's, it can be, with very sparse gravel, it's sometimes we don't always with that. So and in some cases you'll see some fine lines on these cross sections. These are inferred bedding orientations, things that are important for the correlation of the sediments, and then to kind of inform the geologist as he's or she's interpreting the sections. And then also lastly, we'll have the groundwater elevations and PFOS and PFOA data available for posting on those sections, and we depict flow within the section via these equipotential lines, sort of analogous to a potentiometric surface, but now shown within the plane of the cross section. Uses the same idea that you're contouring the data from the well screens in lines of equipotential or equal head, and the flow is going to be 90 degrees to those flow lines. So I'm going to go into the cross sections themselves, and I'm just going to cover the basics with kind of an overview of several sections, and then we're going to go and dial in further. All right, so here is cross section A, which runs from west to east across the base, and then over across Van Etten. This is the Algonquin Delta main body here, shown in the tan. Here is the basal aquitard, consisting of tills and pro-delta and lacustrine clays related to either the 7 Mile Hill and older delta system, or the progradation of the Algonquin delta. And these are the clays associated with onlap of the Nipissing and Algoma shorelines. So it's a key feature here that the Algonquin delta sort of pinches out laterally into these clays, and we'll talk more about that later. But this is significant for the discussion of the plumbing underneath and away from the base. So we're going to focus in on this area a little later. And just a word about Clark's Marsh. We just nipped the side of Clark's Marsh here. We'll focus in on this again later as well. But this is the nature of the stratigraphy underneath Clark's Marsh. We have some of that Holocene alluvium associated with the modern wetland and fluvial system. I think there's some of an incision into, related to the Stanley Low here, and we'll talk more about that later. But basically, you have fairly low permeability material, very organic rich underlying Clark's Marsh, and it's juxtaposed directly against the permeable Algonquin Delta. Again, note the oranges some siltier zones. These are not high proportions of silt, but there's 10% silt in some areas. These are 10% gravels. These aren't smoking hot whopping gravels, but there's a gravel component to these. And so it speaks to a little bit of the sediments. The potentiometric surface shows generally, flow towards Van Etten Creek, Van Etten Lake, pardon me, and flow towards Clark's Marsh. I always have to remind myself as well, keep your 3D thinking hat on when looking at this. Remember the groundwater mound kind of comes like so. And so there's a heavy component of flow shown on this cross section that is out of the plane towards the viewer. So while we're showing convergence on the marsh from left to right and from right to left here, there's also a element of this flow coming out towards you. And similarly with the kind of main body of the delta here, a lot of that flow is coming out of the plane kind of at you. This is cross section B. And again, so here's a scan of a gamma ray log from the Air Force, and here's some of our other gamma ray logs, more modern ones run by Eagle. Again, there's the really stout basal aquitard. This is the Marshall sandstone at depth, but you've got 60 to 80 feet of clay overlying that. So this is a robust basal clay. This depression in the clay, I don't think is a sign of any kind of incision or channelization that runs out of the plane here. I think that's related to the progradation of the delta, and probably this should be shown a little more interfingered here as this thing built out into the basin that was left behind. The clays, it would have played out laterally and in front of it into clays. But some of that irregularity is also probably related to the nature of the surface left by the abandonment of the ice, right? Glacial sequences and glacial topography can be very complex and somewhat unpredictable in its elevations. This again we'll focus in here in a little bit too, but this is the major incision of this Stanley Low. I should note the scale here on these. I mean, this is 100 feet, so these aren't. The vertical exaggeration is quite high in this figure. This is not a narrow figure. This is the modern Assable and the Assable Valley for scale. So this is not a minor feature. And in looking at the logs, we could see finding upward sequences preserved within this incision. And the characteristic of the sediment is very black and laminated as you move up in the section. So this really suggests, incision, the Paleo-Assable here, channel deposits, and this incisive lag, evolving to a bay lagoonal system as this thing infilled with onlap and rise of lake level, and then the inheritance of that valley or the continued evolution of that valley by the modern Assable. So this is more fine-grained dominant, right? So this is this feature we're talking about laterally, and that's located about here and would progress up the valley. This is a significant geologic feature that provides some impedance to flow across the modern Assable. So again, with respect to groundwater flow, a lot of the flow shown in this cross section is into the plane, particularly on the east, on the northern side or the left side of this diagram. So while these equipotentials show some left and right in here, when we get in and if we're looking at that, keep in mind that is just the component of flow in line with this cross section. The main flow is or into the page on the east side or on the north side of this cross section. And as this bends around, you start to pick up more of the groundwater mound, and so that you would actually have a little bit more of a left to right and or out of the page flow here. So I'll do my best to continue reminding of the three-dimensionality of the flow, but that is the mind-bending element of some of these cross-section exercises. Okay, so now last section for the overview. This is D to D prime, and this is back over here by Clark's Marsh, just to the east of it. And again, we're showing, this is a little different scale here. These are, this is only, these are 20-foot intervals. So this is a much smaller section shown. We're not showing 100 feet here. We're showing 20, 40, 60, 80. Well, we're showing 100 feet, but we're not showing hundreds of feet. So this is 100 feet total. So from left to right, again, we're coming off of the Algonquin Delta, and you can see a higher component of gravel in some of this portion of the Delta. And the key thing to note here is what happens when you get into, there's a sharp topographic dip there, that's that scarp at the edge of the incision. Key thing here is look at how the character of the stratigraphy changes when you go from the Algonquin to the modern Assable and incised valley fill. You have fairly massive coarse sands to these discrete finding upward packages associated with fluvial deposition. And so that's significant, and we'll discuss that more in the future. So, and again, the gamma ray does a good job here of showing that while there is lithologic variability, it's all in the coarse grain sizes, the coarse being anything from fine to coarse sand. And it's not until you get to that basal clay about 50 feet down that you have a real prominent aquitard. And so we're showing flow converging to the modern Assable. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but convergence of flow towards the Assable River, a little bit of sort of capture of shallow flow via surface water, and then a deeper groundwater pathway recharging the modern Assable. All right, so gonna have to speed this up. Here's groundwater on the eastern boundary of the base now is what I'd like to talk about. And we're gonna hit these points again, sort of the geologic plumbing, groundwater flow, and we'll look at some of the analytical data that supports some of our interpretations. And again, I think, you know, we can come back to this, but the point we're trying to illustrate here is that when interpreting the hydrogeology of groundwater surface water systems, there are some end members that are sort of known end members in the hydrogeologic world. And we think of lakes as discharge of groundwater, or lakes that are recharged by the groundwater. And these are characterized by equipotentials that come down towards the lake and then curve upwards. Curving upwards towards the lake, showing that the lake is the location where the groundwater is ultimately heading. So that results in these upward gradients. And this we think is similar to Van Etten Lake. Then there's in contrast to that, there are discharge lakes, so lakes that are actually feeding groundwater, and these are characterized by potentiometric surfaces that come straight down, steep gradient dipping beneath the lake. And so they don't see this curving nature. So no upward gradients observed at the margin of the lake. Now we're going to focus in on components of the stratigraphy on section A and C, and talk a bit about what's going on here at the margin of the lake. And so just to reintroduce this, here we are over, we're going to focus on this area now. I'm going to move on to a zoomed in portion of it on cross section C. And on this previous section, you note that, you know, we're talking about the onlap of the clay and the pinch out of the Algonquin Delta, creating some complexity for, you know, or some barriers to flow at depth. But you still have the Nipissing beach ridges, and then this lake bottom sediment that is a potential sort of, you know, one might think is a potential pathway through. And so I want to take a minute to look at that in a little greater detail. And this is based on some of the information from some Eagle sub-bottom surveys of Van Etten Lake. which was some geophysically based work. And if you take the elevation of the clays from that study, being between 552 and 548 within the sub-bottom, that's about this elevation on this cross section, and that matches really nicely with the observed clay elevation in NW7. So this, I think, is consistent with this idea of onlap over an incised Algonquin delta. So I think there's pretty solid standing for this clay coming up right up against the delta here. They also noted in that work, a sand reflector at about 561, dense the sediments above. And so I think that is potentially, I'm getting some echo here. That's potentially, the reworking of these Nipissing beach ridges by the relic, Pine River system, the ancestral Pine River system. And so what would this stratigraphy look like? We don't have borings right within the lake. We have an inference here, but that inference is based on some pretty sound geology, and that if you look up gradient from the, if you look to the north end of Van Etten Lake for the analog of what would have produced, what would have been present prior to the impoundment, you see this small scale, fluvial system with a floodplain and, preserved point bars. And so we know preserved point bars and oxbow deposits to be laterally heterogeneous. And so I'm depicting this here as small scale point bars and floodplain deposits interfingered. This would be not a superhighway of flow. This would be a lower permeability heterogeneous zone that would create only the most tortuous paths laterally across the lake. So the geologic plumbing here is pretty minimal across the lake. And then, so again, with these cross sections, we want to hit the geology, right, the plumbing, and then we want to look at the hydrogeology. And so these are the heads from 2018 in these nested eagle wells. And so the lake level at this time was about 589. And I'm going to zoom into the PDF here. You just zoom in, you can see this a little closer. You can see here that if the lake level is about 589, the head observed, this is hard to read, but it says 589.66. The head observed at MW7 is just slightly higher than that. The heads observed at depth throughout this nested well are all 589 or higher. And so this is supporting the concept of an upward gradient to a lake level that is 0.05 of a foot lower. So this doesn't show outflow of the lake. The lake doesn't have a higher head than these values. It shows an upward gradient. If you go eastward, these gradients remain high, or these heads remain higher with respect to the lake and the adjacent nested pair, and they remain so throughout the water column. So if anything, there's a slight downward gradient suggested by the nested pair at MW08. So this supports the idea of flow from, as shown by these equipotentials, from right to left or towards the lake on the eastern side. And then there's a weakly portrayed divide here, partly because of the orientation of the cross section. But then we get over to MW9 and its elevations are even higher, 591, with maybe a slightly downward gradient and equipotentials showing flow towards Huron. So, and again, the interfingered nature of the stratigraphy there. And equipotentials and heads on this side are from November of 2019, and the lake level was not 589 at that time when these were collected. The lake level was on the order of 585, I believe. So this is why we are going back in our normal process and producing these synoptic well data sets. And we've just completed our first full synoptic this April, so we'll be able to post that on here. But with the knowledge that the lake level was about 585 and these heads of 587, again, it supports, discharge to the lake from Algonquin Delta. All right, and so so that is a look at the hydraulics, and then the other kind of third line of evidence that we like to post and think about is the analytical, and this is just PFOA and PFOS. PFOA is shown in purple, PFOS is shown in green, and we can see that the concentrations on the Wurtsmith side of the lake are on the order of in the hundreds and thousands, so elevated, except with the exception of at depth. These are non-detect. And the concentrations on the east side are largely non-detect in this 2018 data set. Non-detect at depth, a 1.43 at depth in MW7, and then the same observation here at MW08 non-detects and MW09. So good evidence, that contaminant works as a tracer to some degree, that agrees with the hydraulics. And so I feel like we have a pretty solid understanding of the elements at work with respect to large scale underflow of the lake. So a word about the dynamics of the shoreline. This is a more complex issue, I think, on the eastern margin of Van Etten. And again, this is kind of speaks to this idea of, we view Van Etten as a discharge lake, but with some dynamics, artificial dynamics created by the seasonally controlled outlet. And, we think there's a couple 100-foot wide dynamic zone of interchange seasonally at the lake's eastern or southeastern margin. And a lot of that is based on, and so that's a very limited area along the eastern margin. A lot of that is based on this transducer study completed by Eagle in 2020. And we'll just step through some of that here. And this is important work. It's instead of, when we're looking at these, when we're looking at the cross sections, we're looking at snapshots in time of hydraulic conditions relative to the plumbing, relative to the analytical data. The nice thing about the transducer data is that it gives you a continuous time series, so you can start to understand by looking at these, more about the daily, weekly, monthly dynamics of groundwater flow. And if you haven't seen this one before, I'll just take a minute to walk through it, but the red is the Van Etten lake level from a transducer, which is an instrument that is sensitive to pressure, and when calibrated to the barometer gives you an elevation of the water level. This is Van Etten's transducer data from the Stilling Well area down here at the outlet. So this is the lake level, and so what you can see is that the lake level is maintained at a higher lake level through the spring and summer months, roughly the April to March, April to October timeframe. And just stepping down through these, the instrumented wells set up by Eagle, RIMW05 is not shown on this map, but it's north of here along the shoreline. The important thing to note is that the majority of the wells shown here are all recording water levels that are higher than the Van Etten lake level. So we'll just step through that here. RIMW05 in screens at 20 and 60 feet, always higher than, this is foot, feet elevation scale here. So they're riding around 594, 593 throughout the year. MW07, which is located here, is notably closer in elevation to Van Etten Lake, but is reliably higher as well throughout the year, both summer and fall. And that's MW07 in 19 through 20 and 48 through 49. So part of that nested well set that we looked at. And RIO8, which is further away, and so you would expect it to be even less, even higher than MW07, sort of fills that, fits that bill and rides higher than Van Etten Lake. The only one on this data set shown here that is routinely lower than the lake during the lake level high of the summer months is MW03. So this speaks to a portion of the shoreline at which throughout the summer months, lake level or lake water is likely discharging to the shallow aquifer here. And so that's a significant finding from this study. But that is indicative of behavior very close to the lake level, to the lake margin. And we can discuss that further and go look at the actual distances and so on. But this also supports kind of that concept of this being this next slide supports this concept of it being a limited margin. If we look further at some of these wells, and again, the Van Etten lake level curve from the transducer data and another set of transducers. Unfortunately, the transducer studies don't overlap, but if we look at a similar time frame, April to July of 18 compared to April to July of 2019, and then consider this single point measurement that exists, we have some information to go on. You can take this kind of average and speculate as to what the lake level normal behavior would be during the high season by looking at graphically by looking at an average across here. And so what we see is that MW32 in the summer months appears to be higher than Van Etten and is therefore discharging to the lake, but there is some potential during the transitional months for some potential interchange there. So, I think that's indicative of this dynamic zone along the shoreline, but it's not indicative of it's not a symptom of large underflow of the groundwater past the groundwater divide. We think this is something that is limited to just the very nearest and shallow borings. And so MW33 sort of speaks to that. This is 32 is within a few hundred feet or a couple hundred feet of the lake. 33 is over 1,000 feet away, and 33's transducer shows reliably higher groundwater elevations. So so just to summarize, based on the cross sections and the plumbing and that valuable transducer work, we don't see large evidence for significant underflow or continuous underflow or underflow of the lake to Huron. We do see evidence of dynamic exchange within a very narrow area of the shoreline. So now we'll take just a minute and move a little further south as we kind of go around the bend here and look at cross section E and Van Etten Creek and kind of what we know about the stratigraphy and groundwater flow at Van Etten Creek. And again, some of these rules of thumb, some of these general hydrogeologic figures where you have a break in slope such as you would at the margin of the relic Algonquin Delta. It's not uncommon to get some discharge of groundwater at that inflection point, some seepage into wetlands and or smaller creeks, tributary creeks of any sort. And so this is probably analogous to what's happening at the west side of Van Etten Creek, at the north end of Clark's Marsh and along the margins of the Assable Valley. Again, we'll hit this again later, but this concept of gaining streams. So this is cross-section E. Very sandy. You're up on the elevated Algonquin Delta, some concentrations of gravels. Gets a little siltier towards the eastern margin here. Some echoes. Because you're rounding the bend here, I have the stratigraphy at this end of the cross section is really viewed as pretty analogous to what we were talking about on section C, right? So this is, you're coming off of the delta margin, you're encountering probably, some preserved Nipissing era and Algoma era beach ridge type deposits. These may be indicative of some sort of, beach and shore kind of parasequence set. This where you go from fine to medium sands with silts. So that was kind of interesting. And then the Van Etten Creek Valley, while we don't have borings throughout here, the public water records, drillers' logs, and our inference from, the nature of small-scale alluvial valley would point to this being more heterogeneous than the surrounding beach ridge and deltaic deposits. So, so the plumbing of the geology here shows a little wider conduit for a permeable zone through this area. But if we again look at the groundwater elevations and the analytical data, we think it speaks to discharge to Van Etten Creek, which has an elevation of 583 upward in a very typical sort of hydrogeologic scenario, and the analytical data show impacts on one side of the delta and not in the beach ridge deposits on the other side. And just take a minute we'll zoom in and look at that here. We don't have too much more to go here. I realize I'm going a bit long, but we're just about there to the concepts of the others, and we'll open this up for more discussion. So again, here's the historic water levels from 2019. We've got elevations of 589, 588, 587. These are all higher than Van Etten Creek's 583 elevation. So this speaks to a gradient that would feed and discharge to that lower level. The nested wells and the eagle wells show very little gradient at depth, but there is a 0.06 of a foot upward gradient between these two, and so there's not a downward gradient by any means observed here, indicating underflow. And in fact, these are all higher than the Van Etten elevation of 583 as well, so it implies discharge. And if you bring up the analytical data and we zoom in, we're seeing, it's so hard to see with these well screens here, but we're seeing impacts on the order of, for PFOS and PFOA of 4 to 6, 40 to 23, 17 to 15. This is the 2018 data. So impacts, but not screaming hot impacts, but impacts nonetheless within the Algonquin Delta. And then on the other side of this, we're seeing non-detects and a 1.72. So the analytical data, again, as a tracer, sort of speaking towards the predominant characteristic, being just what you would expect from a geologic and a hydrogeologic perspective of discharge to that creek. Okay, so now onto the southern margin of the base, and we'll hit Clark's Marsh and address a concern about potential underflow of the Assable River and discharge to the surface water. I think we've beaten this dog to death, but we think these are gaining streams. Here's a look at a close-up of the potentiometric surface at the southern margin of the former Air Force base. And again, we're showing convergence of flow onto the into the Assable River. Again, these contours crossing it, indicating gaining conditions. Really steep contours at the margin of Clark's Marsh, indicating discharge to the marsh, and then continued groundwater flow away from the marsh. Now we'll pull up cross-section A again, and we're going to move to the PDF to zoom in on this area of Clark's Marsh. I can cover a little of it here. This is the, again, the stratigraphy. These GSLs with graphic grain size logs show fine grain material dominating this core at the margin of Clark's Marsh. The organic peaty, silty, clayey under, this is 20 feet of sediment underneath the marsh, grading into silts, fine sand and silt at depth, and probable channel deposits, and then a more pronounced clay. And so if you brought this Holocene fill down further interpretively and just said this was a little nick of the incised, Stanley Low, that might be reasonable as well. But the important point is that this is a fine grain zone juxtaposed next to the coarser grained Algonquin Delta. And and again, flow, part of this flow here, these potentiometric lines and this gaggle of large screens here is a current remediation system at work, and so that's indicating it's pulling groundwater to those screens, doing its job locally there. But there is still flow discharging to Clark's Marsh on both sides, and now we can zoom in on this on the PDF, maybe talk a little bit more about that before we get to, let's see here. Enjoy the painting a moment. Here it comes.
And Colin, this is Tim. While you're pulling that up, I just wanted to acknowledge that I do have a list of RAP members with questions that I'll turn to in this order. I'll go to David Wynn first, and then to Beth Place, to Arnie Rich, and to Mark Henry once we get to the point where you're ready for questions. So yeah, go ahead.
And that is coming just shortly. So let me
I just want to make sure people realize I saw your hands up. So thank you.
Yeah, and this is a danger of inviting Colin Plank, is that he'll just talk and talk and talk. But I say that as a joke. The analytical data adjacent to the marsh, looking at this from the 2018, again, we have PFOS and PFOA impacts observed high in this vertical aquifer sample, 73 to 77.8 in the PFOA and PFOS, 4 and let's see, turn off these potentiometric lines. Well, 4 and less than 10, I'm not sure, that number is obscured. When we get to the question and answer, I'm happy to turn these off, but let's just keep moving ahead. And then non-detects at depth. And a similar pattern on the other side, although we don't get so deep. We have a non-detect in PFOS and a 270 in PFOA at depth, a 200 in PFOA at depth. So we're showing, detections of PFOA and PFOS, likely discharging to the marsh in the upper 40 feet there. We aren't showing a significant downward gradient into the incision of the Stanley Low here, and indeed the stratigraphy would impede that. So I think this is still an effective, aquitard at the base here. Let's see. So, and again, the discharge to Clark's Marsh is supported by the heads, being have a higher elevation, 609, 613, 600, than the elevation of the water in the marsh itself. So it's likely that this serves as a discharge point based on these relationships adjacent to it. Okay, now we're almost there. And again, just revisiting this section in a little more detail, section D to D prime, which we hit on at the start. And I'm just going to move right over to the PDF. So here comes the PDF. Maybe. The plumbing, the geologic plumbing, as we talked about, very sandy with some gravels, maybe some of the more pronounced gravel, setting up a flow to the south. We're showing pretty strong horizontal flow. And then the geology transitions to this, what is really characteristic of smaller scale fluvial systems, and that you have these coarse channel lags finding upward into clay plugs. So a more compartmentalized, channelized system. And so we portray the flow as it enters this incised, the incised valley, which has these other little smaller channels within it. We're showing the potentiometric lines bunching a little bit there as that flow gets impeded. This is a large inference that, and this is not meant to indicate that this is all just one giant clay plug. We don't have the characterization within this area, and some of the RI borings are set up to gather some of that data. But this boring here, MW13, is, like I said, likely very characteristic of the fill of this incised valley and modern Assable system. The depth of this is based on that cross section A, the observation of this incision directly adjacent to, not directly adjacent to MW13, but in the nearby vicinity. This goes down to 540 foot elevation. And so we're inferring that this incision, because I think that is associated with the Stanley Low, that this incision would go down to at least 540 in the center of the valley. And so what that means is that there's heterogeneous point bar and floodplain deposits throughout here, interrupting this very permeable Algonquin Delta. And again, we interpret the potentiometric flow as groundwater discharging to the Assable River. The heads would promote flow to the river's elevation of about 592, I believe it was. As you enter, partially because of those dynamics of being at the margin of a slope, but then partially just because of some of the changes in permeability, we also kind of envision a divide of flow here, and this is supported by these heads. I'll zoom in. So this would mean groundwater flow into the incised valley fill, discharging to the modern Assable, groundwater flow into the modern floodplain deposits, discharging to tributary streams. but not translating all the way across the underflow, not underflowing all the way across the Assable River. So if I zoom in now on these heads, you can see what we're talking about. We've got very little gradient at all between these screens, indicating pretty strong just horizontal flow. These would discharge to the lower heads to the south, show a little bit of a downward gradient within the nested well pairs. That's consistent with this idea of channelized flow at depth. So we've got a little bit of a downward gradient here, so we show that. So because these things change from kind of horizontal flow to downward, we're depicting sort of a divergence, a zone of divergence there. On the other side, we have gradients that are pretty similar to what we saw on the northern side, in that there's not a large downward vertical gradient shown within this nested well pair. We're looking at, looks like we don't have the nested well information for MW15 here, but we're looking at horizontal flow discharge of an elevation that's higher than the elevation of the modern Assable, which is about 592, and then it's 582, I guess, and it's discharging to that. So no plumbing for the underflow and gradients that don't necessarily support that. And then the analytical data, again, that third line of evidence on this side of the river valley, PFOA and PFOS posted, and we have non-detects throughout, both the up gradient and deeper. Whereas if you look at the detections on this side of the river, we have some fairly high elevation or high concentrations in this shallowest well, 425, 294, and lower concentrations 2 or 3 and 41 at depth, but impacts nonetheless. So, and then lastly, we won't spend too much time on it because just those are the concepts, but that diversion and that kind of complexity, I think, is portrayed here in some of these surface water samples. These are some of these locations that were studied in the past for groundwater seeps. And I think it's reasonable to, even though the thermal imaging, shows seeps, try that 3 times fast, along just discrete areas, I think it's reasonable to say there's discharge, to the margin possible all along the northern boundary of the Assable, just as there would be to the south. And so if you look at the analytical data, we're seeing some of our higher concentrations within the surface waters, some more variable concentrations within the seeps. There's a lower, 16, 19. Again, a higher concentration where there's a little tributary coming across here. So I think, the higher concentrations are being transmitted via the surface water runoff, but there are pore water samples along the margin there that have some elevated concentrations. So there is some of that recharge, whether, from which depth that comes. This is a pore water sample taken in the first, few feet of the river channel. So, that pathway isn't by any means fully delineated, but these observations are consistent with the flow we just outlined on section D. Okay, so I will take questions now. I'm glad you all hung in there. So we've outlined some what we know about the geology, the plumbing. We've tried to support, inferences based on the hydrogeology and the heads. Used the analytical data as a tracer. We can pull up more analytical data. And the current synthesis is, groundwater discharge to surface water bodies on the immediate eastern and southern margins is likely, but that groundwater underflow off base is not currently indicated by data.
Great.
All right.
Well, Colin, thank you. I appreciate that. And you had a lot of material to go through. You jumped right into it. Do you mind just introducing us to who you work for and what your background is as we move to our first question?
Sure. Yeah, so my name's Colin Plank, and I'm a senior geologist with Burns McDonnell, and we're teaming with Aerostar and the Air Force to support on the CSM. And I'm a Michigan native. I'm actually talking to you from Lowell. I did my undergraduate in geology at Grand Valley State, and then I got my master's at University of South Carolina, doing sequence stratigraphic work for Chris Kendall there. I worked for another 7 years for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, doing oil spill response and geomorphic mapping of coastlines with a geomorphologist named Miles Hayes, who is a real character. And then I went back to school at University of Minnesota and worked with a sequence stratigrapher there named Chris Paola and some paleoclimatologists, Emmy Ito and Brian Schumann, looking at the stratigraphy of lakes and their relationship to climate change. And so then after working on that, I came to back to the environmental consulting world, and I've been doing that for the last, I guess the last 12, 13 years. So about a combined, 20 plus years of academic and consulting experience.
Great.
Looking at modern and stratigraphic systems. Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you, Colin. I appreciate that. This is a portion of the agenda where we're asking RAB members for their questions. And David Wynn, you've been very patient. You've had your hand up for a while. So we'll start with you first, David Wynn, and then we'll go to Beth Place. Okay, it looks like you are, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
We
can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
All right, my question is I've noticed through the presentation that most of the data that you've been talking about as far as the monitoring wells was based on data from 2018. But as I understand, there's been data available from 2012 to 2019 that was included. Can you explain to me why you used data from 2018 and didn't take an average overall, or at least review some of the other data?
Yeah, so we have access to the other data in the digital site management tool here, so we can bring that up, and we do include that in our analyses. It's a manual process to post that data on those cross sections, and we like to pair it with groundwater data that it's in close, temporal sort of time frame with. So we're trying to create these snapshots. But but if I can pull up the DSMT for you here in a little bit, we can look at time series of PFAS and PFOA, and so we're very, very mindful of that.
But you guys used the 2018 data as your model. Am I correct in saying that?
We used that as a snapshot that showed what we think are representative conditions, and we haven't seen in the newer data any significant divergence from that. So we will be updating for the RI CSM the sections with the newest PFAS data, and this DSMT is meant to keep that data in front of the team, while we're in that process. So I'm having a little trouble pulling it up here, but so if we wanted to go through, oh, looks like it's a little frozen. Let me refresh this puppy. We can select individual wells and pull up time series of the data. So that is exactly what you're saying, that you can't just base, you know, your interpretation on one generation of data. You're exactly right, and that is why we are you know, why we're using this tool.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Colin. Thank you for the question, David. Let me go to Beth Place. Beth?
Beth Place. Hey, Colin, thank you for your very informative presentation. We appreciate it. I just wanted the RAB members and the folks on this call to understand that Eagle is still in the process of reviewing the work plan for the RI. And so we did have scoping sessions with the Air Force. And I see that, you know, we discussed some of these areas that were presented tonight, and some of our changes were incorporated, but we're still in the process of reviewing the work plan. And so all of our comments may not be captured tonight, but they will be in our comments to Air Force. And a few of the, I don't want to take up too much time here, but some of our high level comments, I guess would be that if you're looking at this figure column, a good place to look at would be near Van Etten Lake, but with the groundwater levels on it. Yep, and if you could zoom out a bit more. And so, thank you. And so one of our comments here is near that southeastern corner of Van Etten Lake, and then as you're moving down, as you're showing the groundwater divide there, yep, and even farther south. Once you get into that southern area, Eagle would just ask that if contamination extended out that far, that we would want to verify with additional data on that groundwater boundary down there. As you get south away from Van Etten Lake, there seems to be few points that kind of correspond to that groundwater boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And then since we're still in this area, as moving from the base eastward in this area and going across Van Etten Creek, I know there's been some speculation that Van Etten Creek is a hydraulic boundary. Eagle would just ask if contamination extends to Van Etten Creek, then we would want additional data prior to concluding that that is a hydraulic boundary. Okay, and just one or two more, and then I'll leave it open to the public. As far as Eagle's transducer study, I know you mentioned, I believe it was MW07, and this is around your slide 55 or 56. So I don't know if that's easy to go back or just I can discuss about it.
No, let's see here, slide 56. Are you looking at you want the transducer data itself?
I think,
is this
sorry, this one is, yeah, this will work. And so on this one, I think you had mentioned, it might even be the one before. I wrote my notes based on, and our team notes here based on the draft slides. And so MW7, it appears, you know, I know you had mentioned, I thought in your slideshow that it doesn't really influence, I think it's the next one, but it doesn't really show a hydraulic influence from the changing lake level. But if you go to that hydrograph, so sorry, I know you're flopping all over.
Right, so here's the, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really, it kind of, there's some peaks in there that seem to kind of follow the lake level for the data that we have, the raising and the lowering of the lake. And MW7 is about 350 feet east of the Van Etten Lake shoreline. And so we just wanted to mention, you know, there's homes in between. There's Van Etten Lake and then homes and then MW7. So if you're seeing that little bit of influence there at MW7, I guess it raises some questions of what's going on between MW7 to the west, you know, to that east side.
Yeah, well, I think, so that to that point, you know, the important thing to remember is that if the lake level is, if the water level in the well is even marginally higher than the lake level, that discharge relationship is maintained. They can track one another, but it's only really where they crisscross that illustrates a significant moment of interchange. And then I think also, yeah, that there's the dynamic zone, couple 100-foot zone is likely present along the margin of the lake. And so it really becomes a matter of understanding, the well screen position relative to that area, and then the local stratigraphy and how that would influence, our estimation of the horizontal velocity of groundwater is based on, a medium sand. And so if you have a coarser sand, it could go a little further. If you have a finer sand, it wouldn't go quite so far. Our maximum, estimated if we made it a coarse sand and gave, a very long time frame, could be up to, 500 feet. But what we think is reasonable based on the lithologies present is probably around, 200 feet or so. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just because of that lack of data kind of on that near shore area, we've just, during the RI scoping, and you guys won't be surprised to see it in our RI comments, we've asked that Air Force evaluate that surface water interaction with those east side residential wells along the shore there on the southeast side of Minneton Lake.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth. I wanted to jump in. We just have about 7 minutes left or so for RAB member questions. So if you don't mind, I'll move on to our next RAB member with a question, Mr. Arnie Lurich. Go ahead, Arnie.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Colin. This is very interesting. I'd like to step up the level of detail and go a little bit higher, a little more layman. Number one, in 2019, I asked Dr. Gillespie at that RAB meeting if there was any possibility of that throat in the southeast of the dam up to north to the well 7 that Beth was just talking about. Is there any possibility that historically or ancestral cut through Lake Huron? And he said it was right at the end of his briefing, and you couldn't see the screen or the slides, but he said, yeah, we don't know. That was in 2019.
Right.
Tonight, you mentioned two things. On slide 36, at 24 minutes into your talk, you said there's a potential, there's ancestral or historical pinch outs or cuts through the historical Lake Huron ridges, which are predominantly to the east of Cedar Lake Road or the main current ridge. So there's a potential there. Then you also on when you got to slide 45 at about 26 minutes, you said you were unsure about ancestral Pine River cut through the ridges. And I would add to that, I think we're all unsure if the Pine River at some point in the last 10,000, 12,000 years ever cut deep enough to get into the dark green area that you're showing right now.
Right.
Is correct me when I'm wrong, I believe is the dark green soil there's a silty till.
It's lagoonal deposit. It's lagoonal deposits into the, backfilling into the valley that was created by the incision of the ancestral Assable. But
right, but it's still permeable.
It's impermeable with isolated zones of. It's not impermeable. It's a low permeable with isolated zones of channelized, or jelly bean-like point bar deposits. That would be, little zones of high permeability.
And
So,
Arnie, if I could jump in, just want to recognize that we just have a few minutes left for questions. So Arnie, is there a specific question that you'd like Colin to address in the time he has?
well, I can show you this extra section here, Arnie, that I think really speaks to what you're talking about, because that's exactly why I made it. Is this section here, H to H prime, runs right along here, and with the data that we've got, I'm gonna make you sick here first, but let's see. Let me bring it up. With the data that we've got, we can show that there's not evidence for a significant channel running through there. This section here, H to H prime, runs right where you're talking about. So this is the north side, this is the south side. The clay, the till, is pretty dadgone flat. There's a little bit of interbedded silts and clays, which I think this is a lateral facies change from like really well-developed beach ridges to beach and shore face to coastal wetland, kind of like you have those modern thin. This actually has organic debris and modeling within it and some shells. So I think that's a shallow coastal wetland, and not, if there was a significant incision of the Pine River, I'd expect there to be a gravel lag of some sort in between here and some sense of a channel margin. So this section, if I can just, that section I just showed you runs right across north-south across there. So if that incision came through, we'd expect to see it in that cross section.
Okay, can I just add, because we have to go, but I think the main point is, I think the burden of proof is on the Air Force to prove after 1970, was there ever a chance that the conditions of water, groundwater, and the plumes moving from west to east ever got to the east side of the lake and contaminated soil at depths below the depth of Minneton Lake, so around 30 feet, ground level, 25 feet, and therefore that's possibly where the contamination, which is now was caused, which is now being sampled at 100 parts per trillion of hexane sulfonate, one of the times that Eagle did sampling, and Bob Delaney found in 2017 another place where there was significant in the 30 to 50 parts per trillion of PFOA or PFOS. So that, I think, is, I'll just end with that. If it's possible, then we want the Air Force to sample more, like Beth asked, and prove that it can't be cleaned up if it needs to be. Thank you.
Arnie, thank you for your question, your comment there. We have time for one more RAB member question, so over to Mark Henry. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I actually have a few questions. I wish we could have the time to get to those, but let me throw out the one that I've had the longest, and it kind of follows through with what Arnie was saying. I believe, and several other people believe, that there used to be a connection, a direct connection between Minneton Lake and Lake Huron. And I was wondering, Colin, if you could please put up the cross section I prime, which is about where that cut through would go.
Yeah, that's exactly
it's
why.
the only one that
go. That's exactly why I've got it. So Yeah, so this is the stratigraphy at that location. So this is MW32. Here's the probably Algoma Beach Ridge down to the modern, and here's this. And so I think MW32 has a little different look about it because it probably does pick up some channel-like features on the margin of, you know, the where the creek was maybe interfacing with the beach ridges. But I don't think this interbedded material at depth, this is the stuff that has some organics and modeling in it. I don't think this indicates a significant through flowing channel, but it is interbedded and it does pinch out laterally. But there's not a strong, you know, downward gradient to like a permeable lag in here. And the interbedded nature of it and then the high organic content makes me think more of like a coastal wetland than a prominent channel. When I first saw these lags here, this little gravel thing here and this little gravel guy here, and then the flat nature of the clay across there, it gave me pause to think about it. But that would mean that we're capturing something in cross section like so, which would be running in 90 degrees to what we would expect the through flowing channel to, you know, if there was a Pine Creek channel that was passing through here, I wouldn't expect to catch a channel profile, you know, a cross section on this plane. I'd expect this to be like running down that, or, you know, just taking a little chunk, and I'd expect there to be something more pronounced here. So I think it's, you know, with the data in hand, I investigated that. I thought that was, but I think probably if there is a preserved channel course, it runs along the margin of the relic delta, and you know, would mimic, you know, the because the same forces that are at play now with longshore transport pushing the system south, those forces would have been present, you know, all throughout the evolution of the
Well, yes and no. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Lake Huron has been at historic high levels since they've been keeping records on Lake Huron. And during the transducer study and currently, levels are probably about 10 feet in Lake Huron higher than they were in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s when a lot of these releases went on. And so you have a potential 10-foot higher gradient that existed between Van Etten Creek and Lake Huron a decade ago than is current now. All the transducer study and everything else was measuring water levels when the lake was at a historic high. And so there is,
if I could jump in, I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of material that we've gone through. I do want to try to hit one last really important element of our meeting before we wrap up. And just one note also, this is being recorded. I know this was a lot of information intensive material to go through. So you will have the opportunity that you can view this same meeting again in the future to listen a little bit more intently even. But I do want to move us to the public comment portion of our meeting agenda. That's a really important element. It's referred to in the Restoration Advisory Board rule and in our operating procedures, and both of those documents which guide our RAB and guide our operations emphasize the importance of having public comment, and it also indicates that all of our discussions should pertain to the environmental restoration of the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. So let me turn for a 3-minute comment to one person who had submitted an email to me just now, to Chloe Roddy. So we'll go ahead and unmute Chloe if we could. And then Chloe, you have 3 minutes to make a comment.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
I can, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Hi, yeah, this is Chloe Ruddy. I'm a legal fellow at the National Wildlife Federation Great Lakes Regional Center. We just wanted to register a couple of comments. First, we believe that the Air Force should use Michigan standards as ARARs for each remedial action from here on out, including interim remedial actions, rather than wait until the end of the remedial investigation feasibility study phase of the cleanup process to officially select ARARs. We don't see any legitimate justification for delaying compliance with state standards, and it makes far more sense to use state standards now from an economic perspective, as well as to adequately protect public health and the environment. Second, we just want to encourage the Air Force to submit more robust proposed plans that include all the information that is needed for the public to understand and offer meaningful comments on these plans. So, for example, in the Clarks Marsh IRA proposed plan, the Air Force did not provide information regarding how it would monitor treatment effectiveness for any of the proposed alternatives, or information about how it chose the proposed locations of its new extraction wells. So we think that Air Force should provide such information, and it should solicit and welcome feedback on proposed plans that goes beyond the type of treatment technology that will be implemented. And lastly, we believe that the Air Force should act as quickly as possible to take further protective measures in Oscoda on top of the Clarks Marsh and future Air Force Beach IRAs to capture and treat contamination that is traveling off base from the numerous contaminant plumes. Thank you.
Chloe, we hear you, and we are doing our evaluation. We are doing the best we can, looking at all the data available, and we are moving forward with the RI, which will provide the data that we need. We still have to complete our remedial design. We still need to, the proposed plan is what we propose. It is not finalized. We will be going through each and every comment that is submitted from the proposed plan, public comment period, considering those with all the data that we have available, using Colin's tool, using all the resources that we have at our ability, and then we will be coming up with the path forward. Now, there were a lot of comments, so it's going to take us some time, but we will get there. Thank you, ma'am.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. And this has been a chock full agenda, hasn't it? We're already at the end time that we had set. And so I just want to turn to our co-chairs for any closing thoughts they might have. Dr. Bartley, did you have any other closing comments there?
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for your time and attendance to this. Looking back through old Beck emails and action items, it seemed to be predominant that more data was needed. So hopefully all the requesters got what they needed out of this. And if this is something that you want, you know, keep talking to Mark and me, and we will see what we can do. Mark?
Yeah, over to you, Mark Henry. And Mark, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I have you now. I'd like to thank everybody for joining in the discussions today. I urge everybody on the call, when the next IRA plan comes through for along Ratliff Beach F41, that everybody in attendance here and everybody who's interested, please provide comments to that plan.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all very much. We are adjourned for the evening. Have a great night. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good to talk to you, Mark. We'll work it out.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah.